Hopefully this morning I can provide each of us, and by the way, every time I talk about the subject of loss of any kind, it's also helpful to me. So I hope my goal is to create some scaffolding today for all of us who are suffering. Um, and I know that particularly most of you, if not all of you, have lost so much in these fires. And just so I hope we can create some real trust in each other here. I will tell you that one of the first things I came out with um, after the fire and we were evacuated after we got home is I started hearing all of this. Well, it's just things, so come on. And I've learned over the years that things are not just things; they're vessels. They hold memories, they hold experience. They conjure emotion and time and space. So things are not just things. They represent and hold so much of our lives, and not to be dismissed as the terrible amputation that it is when something that's precious to you, it may be of absolutely no monetary value. I'll show you one of the most precious things I have. This is it's a picture of me with my mom and dad. And I suppose an insurance adjuster would offer me about 1/10 of 1 cent for the value of the paper and the printing, and that would in no way replace this because its value is impossible to estimate because this was my dad before Alzheimer's and my mom before dementia. So this is not a 1/10 of 1 cent piece of paper. This is my life. And so anybody trying to tell you it's only things and move on, I think would not feel that way were they in your shoes. So it's perfectly, in my view, understandable to mourn loss. It doesn't mean you've lost your perspective. It means that material things can have real emotional value. And that's all it means. And we can embrace that. Now, I think part of the reason Amanda asked me to do this is that I have spent a lot of my time on the inside of other people's lives, helping organize the chaos of their losses. And I've also experienced plenty myself. I'm 64 years old, and who doesn't by that point in life? I have concluded that, and this is from this book Amanda mentioned, More Beautiful Than Before, How Suffering Transforms Us, that suffering generally has a kind of evolutionary trajectory which goes like this. First, we have to survive it. We have to take care of those Maslowian needs. We have to have shelter, protection, food, and physical care. And I suspect almost everyone, if not everyone, who has suffered a loss because of these fires has accomplished that. We're all surviving. And some of us better than we thought, some of us not as well as we thought or had hoped, but we have done the hardest thing, which is purely to survive. And we know others were not as fortunate. And then we move from surviving, which we have all done, to healing. And then we move from healing to growing. And so I want to focus most of my time on healing and then a little bit on the growing. I want to say something counterintuitive, first of all, which is very often we can only move forward by standing still. In the Bible, when there was a cloud over the ancient encampment of the Israelites, the Bible says, I won't get too like Jewy on you today, but I do think the ancients knew an awful lot that we don't. In the Bible, if there was a cloud over the camp of the Israelites wandering, They did not break camp and they stayed put. It could have been a day, a month, a year. But when the clouds were above, they hunkered down. They stayed put. Because to rush the healing, to try to outrun cloud cover, actually delays the healing. It does not promote it. So if there are days, even many of them, weeks, months, when you just can do nothing but sit with it, I would say you're doing everything necessary to move forward. That often nothing is everything, because it gives you this opportunity to heal. And we tend to be very hard on ourselves, especially in a place like Los Angeles where ambition is valued so highly. And we can feel like we're failing, like we're sloths, like our parents would be ashamed of us if they knew we didn't take a shower for 3 days or go to work. But this is part of what it takes, because we are at bottom. We are mammals. We do need to pause. And it is not the same as treading water or running in place. First, you heal, and then you run. How do we heal? And here again, I want to go back to some ancient wisdom. I often kind of consider myself a conduit from 3,500 and 2,000 year ago ancient wisdom to today, to what we believe are modern problems. But there are no modern problems. There is nothing the ancients didn't think through about the human condition very, very deeply. In a way we do not. Every one of us on this Zoom, it's not that we don't have information or facts. Every one of us on this Zoom knows more facts than a king knew 2 centuries ago. What we don't know are the truths of the human condition. A fact and a truth are not the same thing. And what the ancients had that we don't have is they had time to think about what they knew. They walked to the fields 5 miles in the morning and 5 miles back home at sundown. They lived in tiny communities where people had to know and learn how to get along with each other, the dangers of gossip, how to show up for other people. So they knew more about our current modern human condition than we do. One of my favorite quotes by Marshall McLuhan, he said, "I don't know who discovered water, but it wasn't the fish." Now, in other words, we are so immersed in our own reality, we're the ones who lack perspective on it. You know when a fish discovers water? When it's yanked out of the water. That's when a fish figures out it was in water. When it's gasping and flailing and afraid for its life, that's when the fish discovers water. And many of us are that fish ripped out of the water right now. And now we realize the lives we were living. And what do we do with that? How do we manage with this? So let's, again, as promised, I want to go back to ancient wisdom. Why? We are not the first people to suffer fires, plagues, earthquakes, floods. And it's not that I am not employing my father's singular parenting technique, which was stop crying or I'll really give you something to cry about. That's not my point. My point is not that, oh, other people have been through that. My point is we can learn a lot from the ancients who suffered a similar kind of fate, frankly, much worse. Much worse. 2,000 years ago, and Jim can back me up on this, 2,000 years ago, half of all children didn't see their 5th birthday. There were no antibiotics. A third of women died giving birth. Just giving birth, because there was no C-section with crushed ice and Netflix and an epidural. You died. 30 centuries ago, you were a child till you were 12 or 13. Then you got married, had your own family. In your mid-30s, you were toothless and dead. So They knew a lot about what mattered and what didn't. And here is a 2,000-year-old ancient prescription for how we can navigate where we are today. And like many things in religious thought, it has three. So this is at least a 1,600-year-old formula for how to face what the ancients called a harsh decree. And these fires and the kinds of losses we encounter in life, they're harsh decrees. Number one is the Hebrew word called teshuvah, which means to repent or to turn. But what it really means at its deepest level is that we tend to our human relationships. We lean into our relationships. We lean into our friends and our family, and we allow them to lean into us. We lean into each other. We tend to our relationships. Now, just as while none of us can have a better past, I will say that it's best not to try to build this bridge of relationship in the middle of a hurricane. It's much better if you've built it over the course of your lifetime because it's strong and sturdy and you trust it. But even if you haven't built these relational bridges, it's not too late. You're doing it right now by being on this Zoom. The sages of the Talmud put it this way. I won't walk you through the whole conversation, just the punchline. The punchline is, and it's about visiting the people who are ill and suffering. The punchline is, the prisoner cannot free himself. That's a very powerful idea. The prisoner cannot free himself. In other words, no one suffers pain better alone. No one. We really need each other. And if you reach your hand out, when you're shackled by something, when you're locked in, locked out, constrained, enslaved by anything, none of us can free ourselves from that. We have to reach through the bars of that imprisonment. And very often, most often, there is someone who reaches back to help lift us from our suffering. I could probably find the reference if you really, twisted my arm, but it was a study done about 40 years ago about pain. So they took a group of college kids, one at a time, put them in a room with a bucket of ice water. They had to stick their feet in the ice water and keep their feet there as long as they could stand the pain while they were timed. And every one of them did it. They repeated the same experiment with the same college kids, but each was allowed to invite a friend to be in the room with them while they were sticking their feet in the ice bucket. And in every single case, they could endure the pain longer because they were not alone. This is true of physical pain, and this is true of emotional pain. And one of the things that being jerked out of the water like this can do is induce a measure of humility and need that can enable us, even those of us who fancy ourselves powerhouses who can do anything all the time all by ourselves, it can force us to reach out. So the first thing is not to go it alone. And I'm imagining that some of you might be thinking, well, all the reaching out in the world doesn't bring my house back, or my dog back, or my breasts back after a double mastectomy, or my child back, or. It's not that that tending to our relationships undoes the suffering. It makes it bearable. Now, the way I put this is, when you're suffering and people who care surround you, it changes nothing, but it means everything. So let's all be great enough to reach out. and great enough to reach back when we see that outstretched arm anywhere near us. It is the only way. The second is called tefillah in Hebrew. It's usually translated as prayer. But what it's really saying here is we double down on our relationships. Now we also double down on our inner spiritual life now, whatever that may be. I don't care if you use the word God or not. Like, I don't care if you call this a water, a liquid, a glass with water and ice. It doesn't matter what you call this. We're all talking about the same thing. So let's not get hung up on the word God. I'm just talking about your inner spiritual life. If it's nature, it's nature. If it's science, it's science. Whatever it is that you have some faith in to animate the world around us in ways no human can, let's lean into that. I'll tell you something quite interesting, at least to me. Again, I'm going to geek out for a second here. The English word prayer comes from the Latin word precari, which means to beg. And that is the most common Western Christian understanding of prayer. It's petitionary. We are asking for God to intervene on our or humanity's or someone else's behalf. We are begging God to change the dynamics of nature in our favor or the favor of those we love. Judaism really has no such concept, or it's snuck in the medieval period, but virtually none. The Hebrew word for prayer, tefillah, does not come from the Latin to beg. It comes from the Hebrew word that means to turn inward, to become introspective, to find a spiritual center that changes us, not God, not nature, not the universe, but us, ourselves. Prayer is an internal transformation. And we're all living in a time now when we're pretty open for that. Now, if we can move past anyone getting hung up on the God word, because I really don't care what you call what I'm about to describe. The idea of prayer that I'm talking about, or spirituality, or connecting, or manifesting, you use whatever words you want. It goes something like this. Imagine you were watching a fisherman on a lake. He's on his fishing boat, and he's pulling the boat into shore. Okay? Now, imagine that you are from some other planet or universe and you know nothing about the physics on Earth. Nothing. You don't know anything about gravity, weight, force, nothing. If you saw that fisherman pulling the boat into the shore, you could just as well believe you were watching the fisherman pull the shore to the boat. You with me? Because we don't know how things work. Most people believe spirituality is about pulling the shore to the boat, about bringing something down or in. And I see it exactly the opposite way. It's about elevating ourselves to become a part of something beyond. That prayer, spirituality, nature, it's not about changing God. It's about changing ourselves. And finally, the Hebrew word tzedakah, which most people translate as charity, but it really means justice. If we all want to move through surviving to healing and growing, here's my very best advice. Help other people, especially in the midst of our own loss. There's an old Chinese proverb, I love this proverb. It says, if you want to be happy for an hour, take a nap. If you want to be happy for a day, go fishing. If you want to be happy for a month, get married. No comment. I think they meant like there's a honeymoon period and then there isn't. That's my guess. But so if you want to be happy for a month, get married. If you want to be happy for a year, inherit a fortune. If you want to be happy for a lifetime, help another person. And we may feel overwhelmed about how to do that. We may feel too wounded to do that the way our old self might have done it. And so now I'm going to share a Buddhist saying with you. When I feel overwhelmed by the suffering around me, when I feel limited by my own exhaustion or problems, I lean very heavily on this Buddhist idea, which is tend the part of the garden you can reach. There is a part of the garden every single one of us can reach. My garden and my reach is different than yours. Yours is different than mine. Some days I can barely reach to the nightstand from my bed. Other days I can reach across the world. But whatever part of the garden I can reach, that's the part I try to tend, not more. And don't let the fact that you can't do everything prevent you from doing nothing. Unless, of course, we go back to the surviving phase, which is we have to do nothing for a while because we're so depleted. We're so spent. We're wrung out. Grief is exhausting. And it's heavy. So we double down on our relationships. We double down on our inner spiritual life to change ourselves, not the world around us. And we reach out to help others who are suffering. And as I said at the beginning, this changes nothing. Doesn't bring anyone's home back. Doesn't bring anyone's loved one back. Doesn't bring your reputation back if you've done something foolish. But what it does is it enables us to live through these horrible, challenging experiences in a way that brings more meaning, not less, to our lives. And let me be very clear. In no way am I trying to glorify suffering. None of what any of us gain from tremendous loss, none of it is worth it. I would take my dad back for one lunch and give up everything I learned about how loss and grief is different when you're the son than when you're the rabbi. One of the books I wrote was a straight up apology for everything I got wrong because it wasn't until I was the son, not the rabbi, that I really understood loss. So I'm not trying to tell you, hey, this is great, it's character building. I have a friend named Paul. He died many years ago. He had 3 different cancers, 3 different types of cancer. The third type had what the doctors call lethality. They had to amputate his arm, etc. It was pretty awful. And I went to Paul. I walked into his hospital room during that third cancer right after the amputation. He looked up at me and said, you know, Steve, this much character I don't need. In other words, I'm not trying to spin something horrible as something wonderful. What I am saying is that if you have to go through hell, don't come out empty-handed. None of this suffering is worth it, but let's not allow it to be worth less. Again, I want to go back to some teaching from the Bible. My views on it, the sages' views on it. There's a verse in the Bible that says God puts God's words upon our hearts. And the sages ask a really interesting question, like, why upon our hearts and not in our hearts? I mean, if this God of the Bible is so powerful, why not just put it right in there? And the sages give this very powerful answer, which is God puts God's words upon our hearts. And it isn't until our hearts are broken that the words can enter. In other words, in some ways, we can only really be whole when broken. In fact, we are more whole when broken. That doesn't make the pain any easier to bear, but it makes life afterward more meaningful, deep, precious, and filled with opportunities to ease the burden and sorrow of others. And to be forever changed by that opportunity to soothe the suffering of others. And I think, I could go on and on. There's a joke about these two guys bragging about their rabbis. And one says, "Oh, my rabbi's a genius. He can talk about anything for an hour." The second guy says, "Ha, so what? My rabbi can talk about nothing for 2 hours." So I don't want to be that guy. So I'm gonna just kind of back away now, and we'll see where all of this goes. I'm happy to stay on as long as you'd like, and to answer any questions. I do want to do one final thing, which is I always like to end with a joke when I speak, and I want to explain why. The reason is because I have learned over the years of being around families in the midst of the worst day of their lives. And I know when someone in that family cracks a joke, I know they have decided to survive. It is a subconscious decision that this too shall pass. I am going to get through this. There is still laughter and joy in the world. Now, you might have a terrible sense of betrayal or guilt the moment after you laugh, like, "Oh my God, it's my father's wake, and my cousin reminded me about Miami in 1968. Oh, but we laughed. Oh yeah, it's terrible." So laughter is healing, and it is the decision to survive. So I'll just close with this, and then we'll open it up. This is a joke about a Jewish pessimist and a Jewish optimist. Everybody ready? Okay. The Jewish pessimist says, "Oh my God, things could not be worse." And the Jewish optimist says, "Of course they could." That's it. Okay.